My name is Yaakov Weitz, in English Jacob Weitz. I was born in Germany in the outskirts of the city Kassel when my parents, as fugitives from the Second World War, were on the way to Palestine. I will start with my father's side, family. My father, his name was Shmaryahu, which means literally in Hebrew, God protect him, Shmaryahu. He was born to the third mother of my grandfather. My grandfather had 3 wives, of course not at the same time. The first one gave their children, died, the second married again, children, she died, and my father is the son of the third mother. Altogether there were 18 children. The family was extremely poor in a village called Nowy Korczyn, which is 50 kilometers south of Kielce, a regional town in Poland, and about 70 kilometers east of Oświęcim, Auschwitz. A small village, 65% of the population of the village were Jews, the rest were real Poles. As I mentioned, the family was very, very poor, and most children left the house with the need to go and work for sustenance. My father left at the age of 10 to Warsaw to work in the factory of one of his brothers from the first mother, who was quite older than him. It was a factory making soap in Warsaw. Another brother of his, from the same father and mother, Fischel, which means fish, little fish, who was 5 years younger than my father, eventually had also to leave the home due to being very poor and go and work for the same brother from the first wife in the soap factory in Warsaw. Having done that, that saved their lives. Because when the Germans came into Nowy Korczyn, that small village, they collected all the Jews from the surrounding villages and on one day sent them all to the death camp Treblinka. I repeat, the fact that my father and his younger brother were not in the village saved their lives. My father was recruited into the Red Army and participated in the Second World War. And when it ended, he ended up in Russia, where he met my mother, and there they got married. I will turn now to my mother's side. My mother, her family name is Perlmutter, mother of pearls, was born to a family who lived in Rovno, which is a major city in western Ukraine. But at that time, it was under the control of Poland. Language was Polish, etc. Again, this city at that time, there were about nearly 60,000 inhabitants. About 60% were Jewish. There was even a school, primary and secondary school called Tarbut, where all the subjects were taught in Hebrew. The children, the pupils who attended these schools were speaking amongst themselves in Hebrew. She was a daughter to a mother who was a second wife of her father. My grandfather, Perlmutter, Yaakov, I'm named after him, married a lady, a cousin, both Perlmutter, and had 2 daughters from her. Then she died, and according to the Jewish customs, married her sister, who is my grandmother. From her, he had 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. When the Germans approached Rovno, they were on the outskirts, my grandmother, my mother's mother, forced my mother and her brother to flee to Russia, fast before the Germans enter the city of Rovno. This actually saved their lives. All the rest of the family have gone. As I mentioned, in Rovno, 65% were Jewish. And when the Germans came in, within a few days, they summoned 17,000 Jews from the city, marched them 6 kilometers east to a wood, to a small place in the forest. Sosenki is the name, and they shot them all, 17,000 in one day. The rest, the remainder of the Jews of the city, were centered in a ghetto, and a few months later were annihilated as well, sent all to Treblinka. So only the people who were not Rovno people who were not at that time in the city for whatever reason had a chance to survive. And the fact that my grandmother sent my mother and her brother away to the east, to Russia, saved their lives. My mother in Russia, after the war, met my father, who was released from the Red Army, fell in love, got married, and then my father told my mother, I want to go back to the village to see if there are any survivors, because he was not aware of what the Germans have done. En route, on the train, with my mother and me inside, she was pregnant, there were Poles on the train. My father heard them being very, very furious with the Jews. They were saying, because of the Jews, we suffered from the Germans. All this came upon us because we had a big Jewish population in Warsaw, and we suffered because of them. My father told me, then and there, not being a Zionist at all, he told my mother, now we go to Palestine. And that's what he did. He didn't even go back to the village. And they started the journey that took them through Germany. There was a refugee center up north near Hamburg. I forgot the name, it'll come to me later on. And from there they went down to Kassel. This quarter of Kassel, the suburb, is called Hasenecke. And I was born in a hospital nearby, and then they continued their trip.
Was this 1945 or?
Yes, I was born in 46.
46.
Yeah, after the war. From there they continued to another place where they concentrated Jewish refugees. Escape me. And from there they continued to France, Marseille, where they boarded a ship which brought them into Israel, Haifa. And my father joined immediately the Israeli military because there was the Independence War in 1948. He fought in the desert, survived, thankfully. He was part of a team of mortar, sending, mortar fire, Margema. And this is how we started our life. I'm the only child. We started our life in Haifa. We started at various refugee concentration centers in Israel, but eventually we moved into an apartment in Haifa. Later on moved to another city called Akko. This is basically the story of my family. I myself studied in a secondary school, which is a boarding school, preparing youngsters to join the Navy, either the military or it was a nautical college. I served, having finished it, in the Navy. I was on board a destroyer. And later on I continued studying naval architecture in a small country called Scotland. I got married with Ada Schieber Liebermann, Weitz today. We both lived in Scotland for 8 years. Both our children were born there whilst we were staying there. And so it continues. I did mention my uncle, Fischl, whom we didn't know about, because when we came in 1948 to Israel, there was a special program on the radio seeking remnants of your family. And people will come on and give their name, where they stay, so that other people may listen and maybe reunite with the family. We found only my father's brother from the first mother, with whom he used to work in his soap factory in Warsaw. He lost his family during the war, a wife and 2 children, ended up in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and opened again a soap factory. So I had an uncle. Nothing else had remained from the 18 children of my father's family. But I had no cousins, because this Fischl, this brother of my father from the first wife, Mottl, had no children from the second wife. He married again, but didn't have any children. So I was actually a lonely child, no cousins, nobody. I don't even, to date, know what my grandparents from my father's side looked like. I have no pictures, nothing. 20 years ago, I was busy at work. I was working in a company making cars, car assembly, and I get a call from my mother, and she tells me, "I've got news for you. You have an uncle." I said, "Excuse me?" That same brother of my father, Fischl, appeared all of a sudden. When he's 75 years old, he emigrated into Israel from Belarus, after his wife had died 3 years earlier. He decided to make Aliyah to Israel. As soon as he entered the country, he asked, maybe I have a brother or a sister here, and he gave the names of his parents. And they said, yes, we have 2 potentials, one from Czechoslovakia, one from Poland. He said, forget the Czech, Polish. Yes, this is my brother. And they said, well, he had died. He doesn't live any longer, but his wife is still here. The following day, I met my uncle, and I saw my father walking towards me. All of a sudden, I have a family. A wonderful man. He himself had 3 children. One died. One lives in Warsaw today. The other one lives in Israel. And their children and grandchildren, I have a wonderful family. By the way, we are going to meet them in 3 days' time in Berlin. They are traveling specially to meet us in Berlin, even though for a few days, but that's an opportunity. This is a typical story of the Jewish people who had suffered throughout the Second World War. It's not just the Holocaust. Families were torn apart I may still have family in America that I'm not aware of. From my mother's side, her sister from the first mother had emigrated to America before the war, probably doesn't live any longer, changed her surname. So it's possible maybe to find her, but we don't know. So I was fortunate to have a family, even at a later stage, from my uncle, who is still alive and lives in Israel. From my mother's side, only one survived, her brother, that ran away with her into Russia, who after the war returned to Warsaw and became a lecturer for modern history at the University of Warsaw. He was a devout communist. I first met him in 1956 when he came to visit my mother in Israel. That was his first trip as a tourist to Israel. I was shocked. He spoke to me in Hebrew. It was a slightly different Hebrew of old that they studied at the school in Rovno. But he was helping me with my homework in Hebrew. I was at a later stage in his life, he regretted. He realized what communism had done, but he was too old to change, and he continued living with his wife, no children, in Warsaw. And he died there. If you want a funny story connected to that, when he died, my mother, who had suffered all her life with her heart, she was in a heart condition, was lying sick at home, and one of her cousins called me and said Mumik, her brother in Warsaw, had died. He cannot convey the message. He asked me to break the news to her, and I came home after work to her, and I said, sorry to tell your mother, Mumik had died. Mumik was his nickname. He was Binyamin Perlmutter, was his full name. And she broke in tears. My mother is quite a strong character, and within a few minutes, 10 minutes, she recovered, and she said, are we going to Warsaw to the funeral? I said, Mother, wake up. There is no diplomatic relationship between Israel and Poland. We cannot do that.
Which year was that?
42 years ago, I think. And she turns to me and says, if I get visas, will you join me? I said, of course. Thinking quite clearly, there is no way. 2 days later, she says, son, we've got 2 visas. How did you manage that? She said, I called the Polish embassy in Vienna, told them the story. They arranged 2 visas to wait for us at the airport in Warsaw. And when I went to buy flying tickets, the company said, you need to sign. In case there are no visas, we don't return the money. Okay, we flew to Poland. Visas were waiting for us. And that was the first time I actually came to Poland. And he was already buried, so I just went to his grave, said Kaddish, and I was stuck for 9 days in Warsaw of those days, which was very gray, dull. I think they just broke up from communism, became sort of independent, I'm not sure, but it was, and I had different experiences there, which were actually quite good. Okay. Another story. My mother today is 102 years old.
Oh, okay.
She's alive, alive and kicking. Her mind is beginning to be frail, but physically she's still okay. If she takes a blood sample, everything's in the middle. Nothing is astray. 4 years ago, when she was 98, I proposed to her, would you like to go back to your birthplace, Rovno, in Western Ukraine? Today it is Western Ukraine, not Poland. She said, of course. And when she's 98, I'm willing to share with you later on the interview we had with the local television station there. We traveled to Rovno. And
Who is we?
We traveled, that means herself, me, my dear wife, Ada, and 3 other second-grade cousins. One from Israel, one from Poland, and one from the United States. We all gathered together in Rovno. We spent a few days together. My mother just went through, and the lady who accompanied us, who happened to be the secretary of the local rabbi, she's not Jewish, said, would you like to be interviewed by the regional television station? Because it's a unique occasion for a lady who was born here so many years ago, is still alive, and she's back here. I said, no problem. And the following day she was interviewed, and the reaction, I was told by the rabbi, the following day, for people who saw this interview on television at night, was quite overwhelming. So that's another experience.
Victoria.
The rabbi's secretary, called Victoria, who is a Belarusian, is a wonderful, wonderful person. She does a lot of work for families who originally lived in Rovno. She has access to the archives that had not been burned, are still in the city and in the surrounding villages and cities, and she provides information. She provides documents to whoever approaches her and wishes to know something about the past. Normally the 3rd generation of the Holocaust survivors, sometimes even second, like myself, 2nd generation. She does a holy job, a holy work. So much so that the government is leaning on her quite heavily, being afraid of whatever. When the war just broke out between Russia and Ukraine, she decided to evacuate with 2 of her 3 children. Her eldest son she left with her parents, and she's now in Warsaw. And all the people who had contact with her through her holy work contributed money immediately for her to survive. She wasn't sure what she's going to do, whether go to Belgium, Holland, or whatever, but she eventually decided to stay in Warsaw, hoping that the war will not last long and be able to go back to Rovno. C'est fini.
Very interesting, yeah.
If you have any further questions, please.
Your father is, when did he?
He died at the age of 63.
Okay.
That would be, wait a minute, I need to work it out. 63, 60, 60. אם הייתה אז בת 61, היום היא בת
102.
42 years ago he died. 42 years ago. At the age of 63, he had no education. The only education my father had was 4 years in Cheder. How would you translate that in German? I don't know. It's what the little children would study in the synagogue.
Talmud Schule.
Yeah, okay. It's called Cheder. Cheder means room.
Torah Schule.
Yeah.
And after 4 years, he had to go and start work at the age of 10 or whatever. Despite that, he spoke 4 languages, Yiddish, which is also my mother tongue, Hebrew, Polish, and Russian. And was a simple worker for all his life. He just made sure that I get a good education. Mm-hmm. He always pushed me because I tended to move aside from studying, by the way. And 2 years before he could have become a pensioner, he died from cancer. I lost a very dear man.